If you're going to successfully match up bass amp heads with speaker cabinets, there's two really important things that you need to know, and it's very, very simple. You need to know ohms, which is electrical resistance, and you need to know watts, which is your RMS power rating. So let's start by talking about ohms. So virtually every speaker cabinet has an ohm rating of either 4 ohms or 8 ohms. Now, these ones that I've got here, 8 ohms, 8 ohms, 8 ohms, 8 ohms, 4 ohms. Now, it's important to understand that the ohm rating on your speaker cabinet has an effect on the watts rating, the RMS power rating on your amplifier head. Now, RMS is actually two things. It's the continuous power that your amplifier is capable of putting out, but it's also the continuous power that the speaker is capable of handling. So your amp head will have an RMS rating, which will be in watts, and that's how much power it's capable of continuously putting out. And the speaker will also have an RMS rating, and that's what its handling capabilities are. Now, virtually every bass amp head that's manufactured now is designed to run at a minimum of 4 ohms, meaning you can run it into a 4 ohm cabinet, you can run it into an 8 ohm cabinet, but you couldn't run it into something less than a 4 ohm cabinet. So for example, this Markbass Marcus Miller bass head is called a Goldline 1000, meaning it's supposed to be a 1000 watt bass head. But it's important to understand that the RMS power rating is only 1000 watts when you're going into 4 ohms. So if I was to plug this amp head into this 4 ohm speaker, then I would have the potential to run 1000 watts. But if I was to plug this into an 8 ohm speaker, it only gives me 600 watts. So you think, well, obviously you want to plug it into a 4 ohm speaker, right? Because you want to get the 1000 watts. Definitely not in that case, because the RMS rating on this 4 ohm cabinet is only 200 watts, right? So if I was to plug this amp head, which would be 1000 watts RMS at 4 ohms, into this bass cabinet, which is only capable of handling 200 watts, obviously this would be massively overpowered for the cabinet, and I would run a serious risk of damaging the speaker cabinet. So actually, if I was going to match this head up with an appropriate speaker cabinet, I would probably plug it into this one here. So if I was just going to run just one speaker cabinet, I would go from here into this 8 ohm speaker here. Now this 8 ohm speaker has an RMS power rating of 600 watts. So this is designed to run at 600 watts RMS at 8 ohms, and this is an 8 ohm speaker with a 600 watt power rating RMS. So it's a perfect match. You need to run the heads at least 4 ohms, otherwise you will damage the head, and you need to run the speaker cabinets at an appropriate RMS wattage level from the amplifier going to the speaker. Having said that, it's not actually impossible to plug overpowered heads into underpowered cabinets. You would just have to run the amp at a really, really low volume. So for example, if I was just practicing in here in my practice room, I could plug this amplifier into this cabinet and it would probably sound really good because it's a great sounding bass head, it's a great sounding speaker, but I would have the volume way down, like way down, and I definitely wouldn't take this out on a gig. I wouldn't take this head out with this cabinet on a gig because I would be worried if the volume started to go up that I'd be really running the risk of damaging my speaker. Now honestly, when I go out on gigs, I usually use just one speaker, and that's purely a practical thing. It's just a lot more effort to take 2 speakers with you. It's hard to fit all your gear in the car. So this would be a good match, plugging that amp head into this speaker cabinet. Now if I was going to do a gig with a smaller rig, then I would probably take something like this. This is my smallest cabinet here. I can carry this with one hand. It's nice and light. It's 8 ohms and it's rated for 300 watts RMS. Now this amplifier here, this Markbass Little Mark III, is 500 watts at 4 ohms and 300 watts at 8 ohms. So if I plug this into that, then I have a nice little rig that I can use for small gigs. How does it work when you're running more than one speaker cabinet? Right, so you probably noticed I have 2 8 ohm speakers together on the end there, 2 8 ohm speakers together here, 1 4 ohm speaker on its own here. Right, now I've done that deliberately because if you run 2 8 ohm cabinets together, then that gives you a combined 4 ohms of resistance, not 16 ohms. Now, before anybody puts it in the comments section, I know that there's a difference between running in series and running in parallel. We're talking about parallel. So 2 8 ohm speakers together gives you 4 ohms of resistance, and one 4 ohm speaker on its own gives you 4 ohms of resistance, but two 4 ohm speakers together would be 2 ohms of resistance, which would be below the minimum. So a 4 ohm speaker is generally just designed to be used on its own. It's not designed to be used as a pair. If you were to match up a 4 ohm speaker with an 8 ohm speaker, that would still give you less than 4 ohms. So you still can't do that. So this 4 ohm speaker is really only going to be run on its own. But with the 8 ohm speakers, I have the option to run them either on their own, which would give me a lower RMS power rating on the amplifier, or if I want the full power, I can run them together. So let's think about this. So these two speaker cabinets can run together. So if I was to plug this, which is 1000 watts at 4 ohms, and play it through these two speakers here, I have 600 watts RMS power rating here, 300 watts RMS power rating here. So that's a combined 900 watts and 1000 watt bass head. But it's still not quite as simple as that, because both of these are 8 ohms, combined 4 ohms, which means that the amplifier is going to send an equal signal to both speakers. Now this has two 8-inch cones and this has four 8-inch cones, and you're going to have the same power coming from the amplifier to these two as are going to these four, which means that relatively you're going to be pushing these two much harder. So even though you can run these two speakers together and it will give you 4 ohms of resistance and therefore unlock the potential to use the full wattage of this amplifier, it's not necessarily a great idea, because you'll be pushing these two a lot harder than you'll be pushing these four. Now that's not a terrible thing if you're playing at a low enough volume that this speaker can comfortably handle it. But even so, it's probably a more kind of efficient way of doing it just to plug this amplifier into one speaker. Now, if your amplifier has 2 speaker outputs on the back, then it's simple. You just run one speaker output to one cabinet and the other speaker output goes to the other cabinet. Easy. But the problem is, a lot of modern lightweight solid state bass amp heads, like these Markbass heads here and this Warwick LWA 1000, they only have one speaker output on the back. So how do you run 2 cabinets from just one speaker output? I'm going to flip my bass amp round now and I'm going to show you. So here you are looking at the back of 2 of my amp heads here. You've got the Warwick LWA 1000, this is the Markbass Marcus Miller 1000 watt bass head. And also the back of 2 speakers here, so you've got 2 8 ohm speakers. Now here's the thing that is really confusing. The 2 speakers have both got 2 inputs on them, both marked input, but there's only one speaker output on the back of each amplifier. So how do you hook up 2 speakers to just one speaker output? I'll do it for you now. So I've got 2 speaker cables here. So if you run one speaker cable, so just say we're using the Warwick head here, if you run one speaker cable from the output into the first speaker, and then another speaker cable from the other thing that's marked as an input on that speaker into the other speaker, then it functions as if it's running in parallel, not in series. Don't ask me why that is, but it works. So this running the way it is at the moment gives you a combined 4 ohms of resistance. But it's important to stress that if your bass amp head does have 2 speaker outs, then do not daisy chain them like this. Just literally run one speaker out to one input on this speaker and the other one to the speaker input on the other one. So this is only the case with these modern solid state amplifiers that only have one speaker output. So you might be wondering, well, why am I sharing this information with you? Because surely if you buy a bass amplifier, then you get a manual that explains all of this stuff. Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? But in my experience, they just don't. I'd be interested to know if anybody knows of a bass amp manufacturer that does explain this stuff properly, because in my experience, they never do. So I've got one here, which is a setup guide. It's from one of these bass heads that you're looking at here, so I'm going to protect the identity of the manufacturer in question for their anonymity. Anyway, the other manufacturers are not much better, I can assure you. But let me show you this 8-step setup guide for this 1000 watt bass head that we've got here. Step 1. Okay, this is helpful. Unpacking. Carefully unpack the unit from the carton box. That's useful. I wouldn't have known to take it out of the box before I used it. Step 2, this is where it really starts to go wrong. We've got powering up. Ensure the mains power switch is off. Position and then connect the supplied power cord from the AC main socket to the amplifier to the mains power outlet. Now flip the power switch on the amplifier to the on position. Okay, so that's interesting. So step 1 was take it out the box. Step 2 was plug it in and switch it on. Now this is a 1000 watt bass head that we're talking about here, and I haven't mentioned anything about connecting it to a speaker cabinet yet. Okay, let's see what comes next. Step 3, connecting speaker cabinets. Okay, here we go. Connect speaker cabinet or cabinets to the speaker out using a compatible speaker cable. The minimum recommended speaker load is 4. It just says 4. It doesn't tell you 4 what. So there's no explanation of that whatsoever. So let's recap what we've done here. Step 1 is take it out the box. Step 2 is plug it in and switch it on. And step 3 is connect it to a speaker once you've already switched it on. Now, that is a really, really incredibly bad idea. This setup guide here is not worth the paper that it's written on, because the first thing that anybody will teach you about connecting up amps with cabs is that you never ever switch the head on without it being connected to a cabinet. Why? Because they need that 4 ohm minimum, right? If you don't have it connected to a speaker, then you've got 0 ohms, and the amplifier is very, very quickly gonna overheat. Now the truth is that with a lot of these modern solid state amplifiers, they have all kinds of safety things kind of built into them, so they'll cut out rather than blowing up. But even so, you know, the advice in this is just ridiculous, and to be honest, a lot of the manufacturers just don't give you any information at all. And it's very hard to understand, because a lot of these amplifiers are really brilliant pieces of design. You know, somebody's really put some thought into this, but whoever actually writes the information that goes out with them is clearly not the same people that designed them, because most of it's just nonsense and it doesn't tell you what you need to know. What you need to know is you need to understand the ohms rating on your speakers, you need to understand how that affects the RMS power rating on the amplifier, and what the RMS power rating is for the speaker, so that you can then match it up appropriately. That's what you need to know. That's all you need to know. If you understand that, then you can enter the big world of matching up bass amp heads with speaker cabinets.